Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of This Week in Drones. I am here on the floor at ISC West. We've got the booth behind me. You can kind of see it's a little blurred out, but you got the radars up there top, the Echodyne booth. And I'm here with the great Michelle Duquette, who is co-hosting with me. Michelle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you for doing a live stream from there. I can't wait to hear from the folks on the floor.
Absolutely. So a little context for people, if I kind of spin around here. You got quite a lot going on. It's a pretty big conference here in Vegas. A lot of booths, a lot of technology providers, and a big focus this year on drones, the threat of drones to critical infrastructure. And it's not necessarily the main reason people come, because it's all things security. You know, it could be just camera systems, access control, alarms, you name it. There's a lot of camera companies, a lot of, all sorts of companies here. But there's a major threat, a major emphasis this year on drones. And I'm going to sit down with some of our partners and get their take on what they're hearing this year versus last year versus the year before. Is there a difference? Is there is there an uptick or is there less focus on drones? What's going on? What do we hear? What's the pulse? So I'm going to take us back. If you can see that little space back here. And
oh, that's really cool. You got your own little interview alcove.
Oh, yes, of course. And I am joined here.
You have somebody already.
By Chip with AirSight.
How are you today?
Doing well, Chip. Thanks for joining me.
No problem.
I really appreciate it. So AirSight works with Echodyne, and we combine our systems, our radar platform, like the Echo Guards here. We'll put them together at correctional facilities or electric utilities and other critical infrastructure where AirSight will add the radars as a layer to their system, but they bring together the whole stack. They've got the brains in the middle, the C2, the command and control, and bring all the sensors together. So powerful systems. And I wanted to sit down with Chip. I'll let you do a little introduction, and then I guess I'll kind of tee up the questions we were talking about. But
all right. Well, my background's in law enforcement. 25 years retired in law enforcement, retired from the FBI. So I had some good opportunities throughout my career, and now have a great opportunity with AirSight. And again, the collaboration and working with you guys at Echodyne. And so I think my strength comes from the law enforcement background and some of these applications, especially in correctional facilities, and understanding what the threats are, not only just the drone detection, but how the threats apply to the facilities and what we're trying to do to help them be as safe as they can.
Nice. That's great. So you've come to ISC West a few years in a row.
This is my third year.
Third year. Okay. So the big question is trends. What have you seen from 3 years ago to, last year, this year, in terms of the awareness from clients on drones, the threat of drones? Like, are drones even a threat? Is that a real thing? Their understanding of drone detection systems and mitigation systems and all that. Like, what have you seen? Is there a difference this year?
Absolutely. An excellent question. So 3 years ago was my first year, and people had heard more of drones and not as much of drone detection. So it was a big educational process in getting people to understand what the tool is used for, if you will. As that's changed last year, much better conversations. There has been a lot in the news, obviously, with the Ukraine war and things domestically about drones. So people have gotten a better awareness. And then this year, much more direct conversations. Hey, we need drone detection. What can you do? What are your capabilities? And then as always, we get the mitigation question, which obviously is still illegal in the US. But what I try to explain to them is that the drone detection, especially as it's tiered and utilizing the radar as well, we buy them their greatest situational awareness, which is time. And if you have time, you can better react to a threat. You can intercept contraband, and you can work in a more proactive and a less reactive way.
That's great. Okay. Well, with that context, Michelle, as well as folks out there, we are live. So happy to take questions for myself or Chip. So you can send them in through the comments, Michelle, if you see those popping up, or if you have any yourself, as Chip is sharing. I mean, I'll pass to you, Michelle. I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, but you just off of what we started with here, do you have any initial questions, thoughts? He talked about mitigation not being legal. Do you need context for that? Do you have questions? What are
So we know that there's we could spend the entire day just on that piece. I think first, though, for Chip, we should probably show his website, right? And I'm trying to, you're airsight.com, Chip, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, David, I don't know how to do that.
You should be able to hit the little present button down in the center.
Yeah, I just want to put the banner up across the bottom.
Oh, on the bottom of the screen? I don't know if that's possible. But
okay, well, for those that are listening, AirSight, AIRSIGHT.com is where you can read more about Chip's company. So, yeah, Chip, I think that first and foremost, we should talk about detection. And we should understand, there you go, nicely done, how your company defines detection. Because out in the commercial industry and transitioning that to public safety and then to those federal authorities that have counter UAS authority, there are slightly different definitions on what detection really should mean. So could you kind of just give us context from your perspective, how you're looking at detection?
And that's an excellent question. So detection should be, in my opinion, just a singular term that basically says you identify a drone flying in your airspace. And so you've identified that it is there, you know it's there, and then you're gathering as much information about that drone or pilot location that you can. Traditionally, in the RF realm, it's very passive. And then when we go to the radar, that gives us the full spectrum of detection. And then the next, people like to use counter UAS and mitigation kind of interchangeably. I disagree with that, because counter UAS to me is what am I doing to combat a drone, which is my detection and my response to seeing that drone, whether it's closing a door, securing a facility, or intercepting contraband. That's what I see as the counter. And then the true term mitigation normally is thought of in two different aspects. One would be kinetic, where you are physically taking the drone down. And then the other would be a frequency style, either jamming or controlling the drone, breaking that communication, if you will. So those are the two ways of mitigating. And then obviously, to the point you make, it usually falls to a DOD, DOE, DHS, DOJ that can have some mitigation authorities. Mm-hmm. But then basically, those go into that national security realm and what they have to protect as far as critical infrastructure or facilities.
So what you've just highlighted is very interesting for me. So I'm one of those word nerd people where I'm constantly hearing words that make the little hackles on the back of my neck stand up. Mm-hmm. And detection is starting to become one of those words, because we are not slowing down. We as an industry, collective industry, are not slowing down enough to realize that we're talking past each other in some cases. What I just heard you share, detection in your world includes identification and it includes tracking. It's not just a dot on a screen. It's other context that's behind that dot that is included in what you define as detection. And that's what works in your world. On the commercial side, we're separating all of that. And I'm not sure why. There are privacy. I say I'm not sure why. I know why. But there's an effectiveness that I think we are losing by trying to micromanage all of these different layers so much. So I appreciate that in your world, detection is, yeah, there's something out there and here's what it looks like and this is where it's going.
Well, and where you brought up I heard you use the word privacy. And one of the things that people need to keep in mind is when the FAA mandated the remote ID and it went into effect, which was actually March of last year, it basically says for those drones over the 250 grams that you are required to transmit data that tells where the pilot and the tracking and the telemetry. And a lot of that's for safety reasons, deconfliction, making sure we don't have mid-air collisions, especially with low-flying aircraft. So we're doing everything we can, obviously, to stay in that legal realm, but the information is what becomes power for that end user. And again, when we're able to couple all of our sensors to include the radar, we're able to give a much better picture, which gives the end user the actionable intelligence so that they can respond in an educated manner and not just look up in the sky and see a drone.
One thing I want to bring up, though, I think people separate detection and mitigation partly in the legislative bills on purpose, because they want to see movement on advanced detection, which we could get into briefly. And I don't know, Chip, if you have any insights on that, but I think we want to see the legislation on better detection move forward, even if the legislation on mitigation gets stalled. So I think that's one reason why there's a separation between the two. But do you have any opinions or thoughts on that in particular?
I think
advanced detection
is
packaging?
Not so much the advanced. I know a little bit, enough to be dangerous, so I won't comment on it. But it is, I think it is very important that we do have some legislation that moves forward, because we are having more and more threats, and not necessarily by malicious actors, but just the volume of flights that we're seeing in drones is just an exponential threat each and every day.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I will say, I met in person yesterday here at the conference with the Security Industry Association's Counter UAS working group. And so they're a group that represents us manufacturers in the space at the Hill, and they get the opportunity to bring some of our thoughts and advice. And they really stand pretty firm behind the, I believe it's, I don't remember all the reference numbers, like the Peters bill, the Peters-Johnson kind of hybrid bill that's taken, what, years? I don't know, five years or something to progress. But they did say that the conversations have shifted on the Hill as well. Very similar to what you shared, that they're asking the right questions when they get up there to legislators. It's, it's always an education gap with like what drones are actually capable of, what detection systems are, how they work. There's still a big gap there, but they said that there's a lot more meaningful conversations happening. They're not kind of like just sort of preaching to the air, but they're actually getting meaningful dialogue in the last.
I can second that. Absolutely.
Months, maybe, or 2 months even when they've been up there. Obviously, the New Jersey drone frenzy was a part of that. Also, I think the work that we're seeing out of like Georgia Corrections with Operation Skyhawk, how they're getting opportunities to travel and speak to legislators as well, and kind of making waves, because they're showing like the massive drones that they're capturing, that could practically carry a person on some of them, and it's making awareness, kind of skyrocket, I think. But
absolutely.
And so AirSight does a lot, actually, to segue into some of the markets you guys focus on, but corrections would be one.
Yes,
you can kind of get into some of what you
very
guys
heavily
see.
involved in the correctional space. We have found that the drones are just like an online ordering system to be able to have contraband delivered into prisons. So obviously, a lot of the in the correctional space, they're trying to look to obviously mitigate it because of the safety concerns. It could be drugs that are coming in that could be a threat not only to the inmates but to the guards as well, to the employees. But then weapons are obviously a challenge you want to be able to prevent. And again, that's where the partnership with you guys in the radar has made us very effective, because I consider that a zero fail mission. So we've got to see every drone that's going into a correction space just for the safety and security of the employees.
So Chip, we have a comment here for you. Has AirSight worked with companies that provide EW or kinetic responses once your detection has been adopted by a facility, like a correctional facility, and mitigation legislation actually exists?
Question to me again.
Yeah, so essentially, does AirSight work with mitigation technologies in the applications where they're allowed?
So with the companies that have the mitigation once the legislation is allowed it.
So we currently have mitigation capabilities. We have used those and deployed them internationally where they are legal. So we are prepared if there are exceptions or legislation changes to immediately be able to provide another modular layer to our system where we have a mitigation capability.
Great question. Well, I think that's a really important point to make sure that we're installing technology that's future-proofing or future-proofed, right? Where I don't think these organizations want to make an investment every year, you know, once a year, every 12 months or 24 months. They want the technology to last, not just last, but actually be capable of detecting and answering the threat that's emerging very quickly with drones, right? Their drones are changing, technology's advancing daily. So, you know, combining technology that you can build on, that can iterate, I think is really essential, you know. And even I'll just mention with our radar system as well, I showed you the Echodyne before, but it's a software-defined radar. And that's important because we're putting the hardware out today that has capabilities that we're able to build on. You know, as algorithms advance, as drone technology changes, the shape, the size, the speed, all that, we can continue to advance our algorithms and push updates to the radar, and now it's able to stay ahead of the threat. And as Chip said, we're also installed, you know, on the war front, you know, with the warfighter overseas and getting vetted and tested and updating everything on that level. And we're able to take all those lessons learned and bring them into the commercial space. They're getting the same technology, the same hardware, the same algorithms, you know, on the radar perspective, right? But
absolutely.
I mean, any thoughts on that on your end, aside from the radar, you know, where in terms of the future proofing, how do we stay ahead of this threat? It's rapidly advancing.
The number one is to stay as knowledgeable as you can. I'm very happy with our founder in that if there's a new piece of technology, he's buying it or testing it tomorrow, because that is the only way to stay future proof, as you will, is to make sure you stay as current with your knowledge base yourself. And so I think that we are positioned in a very good way to continue to evolve with technology. And again, it's creating partnerships like we have with you guys that give us those tools to continually move forward.
Nice. Come on. Well, any last questions, Michelle?
I do. I have one more question about data security. You're at a security conference. We're talking all about security, and data is all over the place. Help me understand AirSight's positioning on how they secure the data that they use.
So an excellent question, because data comes up, where it goes, who handles it. We take all the data directly from the sensors. It goes back VPN to the AWS cloud. So we're very secure. We obviously, even with government entities, can use an AWS Gov cloud because that is critical to us. All of our data stays within the US. Nothing leaves the US. So that's our excellent questions, good concerns, and just another point where we try to stay as customer service oriented, because protecting that data is critical.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Chip. Well, thank you so much.
Anytime.
And,
thanks for having
this guy here.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chip. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Well, we are going to mobilize here briefly.
All right. Road trip.
Another partner that's on their way, I believe, around 10:30. But I figured we would we'd have some fun, you know.
All right.
And I'm gonna put some people on the spot, and we're gonna see how they do. Hey, Kayla, you want to jump on the podcast here while we're live and talk a little bit about what you're seeing, what you're perceiving in the industry as you're taking notes? Okay, all right. Next time.
So as you're walking around here, I was taking a look through the agenda.
Yeah.
And there are some panel presentations or some educational sessions going on there, David, that are kind of on the periphery. They don't mention drones specifically, but things like threat intelligence, that's really important to us. I'm not sure that the panels that I was looking that I saw had that as part of their narrative. This was like on Tuesday. There was a really good one.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, are you hearing that in the conversations that you've been privy to, even though it's not posted on agendas?
So the threat intelligence piece
for drones specifically.
That's a great question. I mean, not exactly. I wouldn't say that people brought up that phrase. I would agree that with what Chip said about the fact that conversations have changed a little bit this year, where a lot of folks coming up to the booth, I mean, for one, they've either heard of, now they've heard of drone detection, drones being a threat. They've heard of Echodyne. They've heard of, our partners. And I feel like it's less like catching the people walking by and trying to educate them, and a little bit more direct, like right into the application versus all of the other layers necessarily. So they're kind of like, all right, we know we have an issue with drones, or it's a threat. Here's what our facility looks like. We've been mandated to go out and find a solution for that. What do how does Echodyne, how does Echodyne radars fit that picture? Can you help us? Let's look at the application. Let's talk about the ranges. Let's talk about the heads up. And, we do start to get into that intelligence piece, because that's, they have to have a plan for what they're going to do with the alerts when they get them. Right. So I just, I didn't quite hear that phrase, but I kind of, those are the types of conversations I'm hearing.
That's where my head goes, is we talk a lot about detection. So it was great that Chip brought that up.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Any tech-centric goodness going out on there as it relates to hasty integrating with other agencies or securing networks. Any tech conversations going on there, David?
That's a good question. Not really. I mean, to be honest with you, most of the people here at ISC West, they work in, for example, retail. They're outfitting, malls or something else with cameras or access control across the country, and they're just hearing about drones, and they're like, I'm not sure yet about that. The next one may be like data centers, like big corporate groups that then they're a lot more concerned about drones than, like, say, the retail space. So to give you an idea, yeah,
right. We know that it's going to become important to them really quickly. And so this is just how the industry grows and evolves. So where my head was going is that we talk a lot about detection, and we kind of put all our apples in one basket, because detection is how we determine whether or not there's a nefarious drone out there. We're trying, all kinds of things like remote ID and what have you to identify them. But this threat intelligence piece for drones is especially difficult because drones are new. We don't have like historical data to pull from and get trending for behaviors. So I'd be very interested in if any of these folks that are in the threat intelligence world could maybe sit down and talk with us at some point, so that maybe there are some tools we can use from them to help us kind of define what it needs to look like for the drone community.
That's a good point. Yeah, where we could cross-pollinate a little bit of the lessons learned from the classic physical security world, which is much more what we're, talking, like the conversations here are more grounded in that classic perimeter detection, cameras, access control. But they've done a lot of work to build the threat intelligence reports, in like video management systems like Genetec and Milestone, and these are like pretty famous camera, interfaces, and they'll pull in intelligence across thousands of cameras and correlate that information. So I'll have to chase that out maybe with some of those guys, and kind of see where we could cross-pollinate that into the drone detection specific world. I do see those two worlds starting to come together, whereas, like, for the most part, you and I are at a lot of events, a lot of expos that are much more industry specific, with people who are very familiar with drones or very familiar with, like, Department of Homeland Security level threats. So those are a little bit more sophisticated audiences, that are also more familiar with drone detection specific equipment that's like its own ecosystem, right? It's like,
yep,
a lot of these guys just drop like their own software, their own pieces of hardware. Doesn't matter what the client's using today, they just kind of drop this piece in because with drone detection, because it's kind of more complicated. However, I do see it becoming more plug and play. The technologies are coming together in a way that actually is starting to integrate into the classic security interfaces, if you will. I mean, does that make sense?
It does. In my mind, that's the only way that we meaningfully evolve, is by getting all of those diverse perspectives and asking questions of us. Well, how do you do this? And how do you think about doing that? Well, we hadn't thought about it because it's not really in our world. But if this is going to convey to your world, obviously we need to think about those things. We don't know what we don't know. So being able to connect with all of these other sectors is super important for our continued growth and stability.
Yeah, big time. I mean, the question on TAC is a great point, and that tends to be a little more military focused clients,
Well,
that are leveraging that. Has been in the past, but
it has been in the past.
yeah,
will it in the future?
Totally. I agree that TAC is the way. Thanks, Andrew. I think that there's really something to that, as we've talked about on previous podcasts, right? With Jason Day, what they're doing in Texas DPS, and all the other surrounding agencies sharing information, putting it into one place where they can all access, right, and get that meaningful intelligence layer. So this is good. I mean, because I have a whole day here now, with the booth, at the booth with people walking up asking questions. So I think we may be kind of wrapping here shortly, because the next fellow I wanted to bring on is not able to make it. He's in the middle of a live demo and talking to real customers, selling real products at the time. So, he wasn't able to make it over. But I'm going to take some of these questions. Threat intelligence, as you mentioned, TAC integration. How do we centralize all this? Anything else that you think would be interesting to sort of cross-pollinate, from the drone or the aviation world that we're more familiar with into this more classic physical security space that I can take away, and then we'll probably wrap here shortly. If anyone else has thoughts, thanks for streaming those in, Andrew and Michael and others. I mean, in the next few minutes, if you have any other comments you want to make or questions I could be asking folks out here, please leave those thoughts. But any kind of overarching, I don't know, connections that you're making outside of those, Michelle, that I can take with me today?
So I think that the filter I would ask you to put on, and this is what I would do if I were there, is I would be going to as many people who have strong expertise in a certain area, and I'd be asking them, well, what about drones? And listen to what their responses are. And what I typically listen for is where they have something that surprises me, that seems to come out of left field for me, because those are the things that are highlighting what I don't know. And that's how we learn about where we're kind of weak and where we need to learn more, become more educated in their world. And that allows us to be able to interoperate. Everything that we do needs to focus on interoperability. And if we cannot achieve interoperability, then we're basically paralyzing the users. They can't continue to buy 16 different complete systems that don't talk to one another.
That is such a good point. Actually, I'll bring up one thing that came up earlier in a conversation this morning on that note, is there's correctional facilities that have existing cameras that they're wanting to see if they can integrate into the drone detection system and have the radar cue those existing PTZs that they maybe have out for classic perimeter detection. It might be turning and looking at a person walking up to the fence line. They're like, well, we've already invested in hundreds of cameras and they're all over the facility and they're looking in all these different directions. Can we utilize those and map those to cue to where the camera or to where the radar is saying, hey, there's a drone heading in from the east at this height, at this speed. Can we start to leverage some of those? It is challenging. Some of that technology wasn't built to look up into the sky, to be frank. A lot of it is, flipped upside down. If you've seen, dome cameras, and they can't typically look even above horizon. They're looking, down and kind of out, maybe at a 45 or degree angle, or even at 80, 90, but they can't look then above, into the negative space almost. So then we typically use, a positioner camera. That means it's sits upright, and it can look up all the way around, and so it can see the sky. So to give you one example of cross-pollinating a technology, but also end users starting to ask, what, can we leverage what we already have? How can we? Maybe there's a way. Maybe they don't have to look up. Maybe there's cameras that see some of the horizon already just by nature of their field of view, fixed cameras, let's say, that aren't PTZs, but maybe they see a little bit of the horizon on that side of the building versus this one. Can we start to kind of map that intelligence?
Yeah, and then that's kind of that's another lens to have always on. Is, I mean, there's a lot of controversy about dual use technology, right? And some people are firm believers that, yes, we can build dual use technology, and other people are like, no, man, that doesn't work. It's built for one purpose and it's really good at that purpose and it kind of sucks at the rest of it. However, I think there is dual utility, and it's not a plug and play. Perhaps it's not copy and paste, but there are concepts that are being used. Let's say, just for example, the mesh network discussions that are happening there. It's plausible that we should be paying more attention to how they think about their mesh networks, how they deploy them, what protocols they put in place, even if it has nothing to do with drones, because there's probably an applicability that we can translate into
Sure.
our world. So
Well,
I do think for those things too.
Yeah, to springboard off that, I had a conversation yesterday with a communications company that owns and leases out space on their towers. And they've had so many deployed, and they'll lease out to like T-Mobile and others, but they're also well positioned to get that bird's eye view over certain cities and counties and areas where we're talking about where can we be strategic and say, okay, you've got towers here, and also this electric utility wants to do inspections and maybe fly above 200 feet and in that area and might need radar coverage. Can we mount the radar to your tower and use your communication backhaul to maybe push it all into TAC, let's say.
Exactly.
And, and start to kind of collaborate that way. That was an interesting one, that I'm going to follow up on. So brilliant, you guys. Well, thanks everybody. I think people are asking about new laws. I will follow up on that with this Security Industry Association Counter UAS working group that I mentioned. We met in person yesterday. They're going to send us a follow-up with some updates on legislation that they're tracking. And actually, this next Thursday, in a week from today on the 10th, Brandon Youngblood is going to be going through, not necessarily details on all the legislation, but we'll probably touch on that. But he's going to also talk about the processes that federal agencies have to use when they receive drone incident reports, and each one's different. What's their role? What's the FAA's role versus like DHS and CIA and all these different groups? So that Andrew, asking about new laws. Tune in next week for sure to hear a little bit more of a deep dive on that. But
looking forward to that.
Yeah, and Andrew, just your last question, and I'm gonna I'll probably close out here. But Drone in the Box, we're at ISC West. I mean, I actually need to like fully walk the floor because I get stuck at our booth, talking to people, having great conversations. I don't get to walk as much, but I think before the show's over, maybe later this afternoon, I'll walk around. I'll see what I notice on that. But just initially, that hasn't jumped out at me. I think that it's more focused on detection. I mean, there's a handful of drone detection companies here that are really focused on that. But some of the talks I noticed, I think there was at least one that was about how to like expand your drone surveillance program or something like that, using drones. But I didn't get to attend that one. So I'll do a little digging on that. But I think Exponential, and there's other very drone focused commercial UAV conference, and some of those that are actually, I think that was in Vegas recently, are much more heavily focused on drone tech itself. But
I think that's the point. I think that we're kind of dancing around is, I'm projecting that ISC West 26 is going to have much more drone content. And that's the goal, right? We have Exponential. We've got CDA. We've got these really big, comprehensive drone-specific or autonomy-specific communities and all kinds of tech. And we all talk the same language. But the goal is to get that out of our cone and into the rest of the world at conferences just like this, where there are experts that have been looking more broadly at security. And now we have this drone piece where our folks have been fine-tuning their skills. And we need to match them together.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate it, Michelle, and everybody out there. Thanks for the questions and comments. And it was fun tuning in live. In the future, one day, I'm going to walk the streets and actually get people to do ad hoc interviews. But so far, no luck there. I've tried a couple times, but we'll get there. Maybe we'll get a little more famous, and then people will recognize the face and then or the brand or whatever, and they'll be like, "Yes, I've been waiting for you to walk up to me and talk to me." maybe that's what it takes. I don't know, but we'll
I
keep
think
trying.
that will happen, David Lewin.
We'll keep trying. But thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you all next week. This week
All
in
right,
drones.
take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks.